Hello again. My attention was drawn the other day to something truly extraordinary. I'm aware that the allegation that this or that part of modern European or American society is institutionally racist, but who would have expected this lazy accusation to extend to the teaching of mathematics? In the description to this video, I give a link to a guidebook for teachers of mathematics, which will enable them to decolonise their curriculum and rid it of all those unacceptable features of white supremacism which seem to have crept in over the years. I shall look in detail at this document and discuss the idea of ethno-mathematics in later videos, but today I want to talk about one aspect of this madness. Click on the link I give and you will find yourself looking at something called A Pathway to Equitable Mathematics Instruction, Dismantling Racism in Mathematics Instruction. Scroll down a little and you'll find the theory upon which this whole enterprise is predicated, which is a list of the characteristics of white supremacy culture in organisations, including the mathematics classroom. These are given as perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, paternalism, either-or thinking, power hoarding, fear of open conflict, individualism, only one right way, progress is bigger, objectivity and right to comfort. Perfectionism, of course, is another way of saying that everything you undertake is correct and it should not be done in a slapdash or ill-conceived fashion. That such a concept should be regarded as the preserve of white supremacists is curious in the extreme. The next characteristic of those white supremacists is a sense of urgency in an organisation. This means, of course, meeting deadlines, turning up in the classroom or workplace on time, and being aware that you'll have to hand in your homework assignments and so on time, just like everybody else. Anybody who has ever worked in a secondary school or college of further education will be well aware that black students appear to be constitutionally incapable of arriving on time for lessons or giving in their work at the same time as everybody else. I've never before seen this codified, and the requirement for black people to abide by the same rules as everybody else is being part of white supremacism. I'm bound to observe that Indian and Chinese students never seem to have any of these difficulties, so I don't think it's particularly a white thing. Worship of the written word means having a respect for books and the information and culture which they transmit. Obviously, in a small village in which live a few pre-literate people, simple concepts can be handed down orally, but this is hardly possible when you're talking about quantum chromodynamics or calculus. Fear of open conflict is an interesting thing to attribute to white supremacism. It is true that in civilised society we try to avoid open conflict because, of course, this is something which makes an orderly and peaceful life pretty well impossible. We prefer to settle disputes by compromise and cooperation rather than by displaying anger and indulging in violence. That's why we have a police system, courts, so on, judicial system. I have never before seen this desire to curb our aggressive instincts described as a bad or a racist thing. It is very wrong and ill-natured of me, of course, but just as the mention of rejecting the sense of urgency put me in mind of black students turning up late for every lesson, so too this seeming endorsement of open conflict puts me in mind of the bloody wars and tribal violence seen in Africa, to say nothing of the shooting and stabbings on the streets of British cities. Is this kind of open conflict really better than avoiding it as we white supremacists supposedly do? The idea of rejecting objectivity is, of course, disastrous for any group. We remember that critical race theory rejects the Enlightenment in place of storytelling and the sharing of lived experience. The difficulties which such an approach, abandoning the idea, for example, that 2 plus 2 is objectively 4, or that dividing the circumference of a circle by its diameter must inevitably yield the irrational number we know as pi should be obvious enough. This applies not only to mathematics, of course, but also in the whole of science and indeed our day-to-day lives. There is something terrifying about all this, as it is an attack upon reason, science, and indeed the very basis of our civilised society. I shall be looking at this guide to non-racist mathematics in some detail in future videos, but feel that too much at one time might cause viewers to have nervous breakdowns and run out into the streets screaming in horror. A little at a time might perhaps be a safer approach.